So my name's Peter Graham. I'm the Executive Director of CBOS in the Department of Justice, and in that role, I'm also the Registrar of Working with Vulnerable People. I've got a short presentation today on changes to the Working with Vulnerable People Act that came in on the 1st of February, which has implications for employers and volunteer organisations. And then I will be happy to take questions. So I'm just going to share my screen so that people can see my presentation. Has that worked?
Yep.
Great. So on the 1st of February this year, some amendments to the Registration to Work with Vulnerable People Act commenced. The primary purpose of those amendments was to introduce the new category of NDIS worker screening, but the Amendment Act also included some changes to the system for both workers and employers, and addressed some contemporary practices in the Act. And it also extended the registration period for 5 years. So I'm just going to go through the key changes to the Act, particularly as they relate to employers, and then we can have some time for questions. So the Act defines employers as an entity for whom a person engages in a regulated activity, and that is irrespective of whether the regulated activity is paid or voluntary. And so those current regulated activities include child-related activities, which have been regulated since the scheme was implemented from 2014 and 2015, and then NDIS-related activities, which is the new category that commenced on the 1st of February. So here's just a list of the child-regulated activities. So the Youth Justice Service, Child Disability Service, Child Education Service, Adoption Service, Guardianship Service, Child Protection Service, the State Library Service, Child Accommodation Service, Child Transport Service, Child Health Programming Service, Child Mentoring Service, Child Legal Service. So the delivery of those services are regulated activities and therefore require people undertaking those services require registration. As I mentioned, the primary driver of the Amendment Act was to introduce the NDIS category of vulnerable people into the Act, and then also to ensure that they're appropriately regulated. Unlike perhaps the child services, which list out quite specific services, the sort of services that are provided through the NDIS are very varied and diverse. So they're not as simple to categorise, but I will just go through them. So assistance to access and maintain employment or higher education, high intensity daily personal activities, assistance in coordinating or managing life stages, transitions and support, assistance with daily personal activities, assistance with travel/transport arrangements if activities relates to specialised transport to school, education, employment or community activity, specialist positive behaviour support, community nursing care, assistance with daily life tasks in group and shared living arrangements, innovative community participation, development of daily living and life skills, and early intervention and supports for early childhood, specialised hearing services, interpreting and translation, participation in community, social and civic activities, exercise physiology and personal training, management of funding for supports and participant plans, therapeutic supports, specialist driver training, specialist support coordination, specialised supported employment, hearing services, customised prosthetics, and group and centre-based activities. Now, with the NDIS related services, the key thing is that it is where these services are being offered by an NDIS employer, so through the NDIS to an NDIS participant. So it is, in essence, that link that it's an NDIS funded service that then the requirement to have registration is linked to. There are some exemptions in the system, and those are unchanged with relation to the new categories that have been introduced. Some common ones are workers and volunteers under 16 years, students on work experience or doing practical training if where a registered person is present, workers or volunteers registered under corresponding laws, police officers, and workers or volunteers engaged in activities were not in contact with vulnerable persons and not engaged for more than 7 days a year. So those exemptions are unchanged under the Act. So as I mentioned at the outset, one of the key changes that came in with the Act was there was also changes to the obligations on employers, and the key one is employers must ensure that workers' details are added or removed within 10 working days after the worker starts or finishes working. So in essence, employers now have an obligation to notify the registrar when they engage staff who are undertaking a regulated activity and when they finish. And they can do that through the employer portal on the CBOS website. This is a key change in the Act, and it is really about ensuring that in the system we have line of sight where people are undertaking regulated activities. It's also very important in the context of when a registration is suspended or cancelled, that the employer can be notified appropriately so that the person can no longer undertake the regulated activity. So prior to 1 February, that there was an obligation on employees to provide this information and keep it up to date. These changes may require employers to do it as well, and that will give us the full view of people undertaking regulated activities. So the employer portal, I'll just comment on that for a moment, has been around for some time. It enables employers to establish a profile within there where they can then add their employees, and so that the registrar has oversight of who is working and volunteering with their organisation. With this change, I suppose we anticipate that a lot more organisations will use the employer portal than have previously, and there are a range of resources on the CBOS website, including a employer portal user guide, which explains how to both set up a profile but how to manage the adding employees and taking them off, and the notification requirements and other things. So I would urge people to who are unsure to have a look at that user guide, but people can also contact CBOS for advice and support. So the second change that affects employers is for those employers who offer NDIS funded services. So from the 1st of February 2021, so this year, NDIS workers who start working for NDIS providers must apply for the NDIS employee category of registration. So prior to this, NDIS required Tasmanian workers to have a registration to work with children. So in essence, while we transitioned to the new system, we registered people under the child category. From the 1st of February, they're required to register in the NDIS category, but only for new employees. For existing employees who are registered under the children category, it is when they renew their registration, they will then be required to tick the additional box or just the NDIS box if that's the case. So no one needs to get new registration as a result of this change, but for new employees, they will need to. The last bit is about the last change that affects employers is around where the period between engaging someone and their application being processed for registration. So in that period, the applicant can work, but the worker must be supervised by a registered person at all times, and have a risk management plan in place that is specific to the worker. And those risk management plans would deal with things that are unique to both the worker and the situation, but would deal with things like how the worker would be supervised, and appropriate record keeping and other things. And we don't dictate how that plan is developed, but it must include information about how supervision will be managed. So they're the key changes that affect employers. So as I said, the requirement to register or notify the registrar when people are engaged and when their employment ends. The ability to the need to have a risk management plan when people are where people have been engaged but they have yet to get their registration, and then the need for the new category of registration for employees who commenced after the 1st of February and are working in NDIS funded services. So that is the key changes. There are other changes in that Act that relate to public sector bodies, so government agencies, state service agencies, and Tasmania Police, with regard to notification of behaviour and other things, but they don't affect employers more generally, so I won't go through them. So I think that's where I'll stop, and I will take questions if that's helpful, Bridget.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I might just turn the recording off now, and we can have that bit if that works for you, Peter.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I guess we'll open it up to anyone that might have questions.
Can you hear me?